All right, we're all set.
We are all set. So, firstly, Michael, I just want to say thank you. So, this is the very first Bradley Keenan podcast, and I was originally going to try and get some friends to do it first, and then I had a moment of inspiration as I got off a flight, and I thought, I know, Mike's the guy, and I would just ask him. I was expecting you to say no, but you said yes.
It would be foolish of me not to take advantage of your gigantic reach, your audience.
Yeah, it's growing by the day, but I don't think we're going to have 1 million downloads on day one.
My expectations are set pretty low, so
good. Well, we're talking to an audience of 0 at the moment, so we can only grow from here. It's like, do you remember the D Ream song? Things can only get better.
Who could forget? What an anthem! Yeah.
Let's start with an introduction into Michael. So obviously we're doing an audio podcast, but we're also videoing it, so it's a video podcast. So for people listening to it only, they'll just have to imagine 2 good-looking 25-year-old guys. But for people on video, will probably know that there's somewhat of a difference between there. But if you can just give us an overview of what you do at the moment and what your role involves.
I'm very fortunate to be employed here at Group M, who are the world's largest media investment management business. So we put the world's advertising dollars to work is the simplest way to understand it. My job here is head of talent acquisition for North America. And I live and work here in New York, and I'm responsible for all hiring, and that includes obviously the management of the team, the systems that underlay the recruitment strategy, and we do top to bottom recruiting here. So that's from C-level appointments right down to entry level.
So you see a fair amount of CVs? Or do you not see any anymore? From your ivory tower, there's no CVs making it all the way up.
I still recruit. There are definitely people in my peer group who run large recruiting teams that either don't want to recruit or, choose not to, or kind of forget how to do it perhaps. But I definitely like to keep my hand in particular, because I've only been here in the US since January of 2018. It makes a lot of sense for me to, in order to really understand the market, I need to be out there talking to people. And yes, that involves reviewing resumes, of course, which is the correct terminology.
What's your view on resumes? Like, because in my world, I kind of feel like they're dead, but I don't sit in your position. So I'm interested to see what your take on it is.
So one interesting quirk of America that I found almost quaint was that people would literally rock up to an interview of all different age groups, and they would bring along a paper resume. The economy in New York is very digital. Those people that operate in our world, in the world of digital media and advertising, are also, it was quite a surprise to me that people would bring along like paper copies of their resume. I saw the same thing happen in like 2008 in China, and obviously as I was in my formative years in the UK, what I particularly liked about it was the kind of the sincerity of the act. And it was like people do it with such,
almost like receiving a business card in Asia, where there's that point where you take the time to look at the card, show that you've taken the time to actually care.
For sure. So,
yes.
That kind of, obviously there's a larger business card with more content on it, but in principle, the feeling of it was exactly like that. So it was slightly confusing at first, because in Singapore and for most of the Asia Pacific market, certainly since 2011, even the practice of business cards is kind of not really, that's considered a bit old school in many Asian markets, but not all. I was certainly very surprised by the act of handing over symbolically the resume. I have never really liked resumes. Obviously, if you work in recruiting, you're literally processing a gazillion resumes at any given time in any given year. And I got really kind of antagonistic about wanting to remove the resume from the application process when I got my first corporate recruiting role, which was in 2011. So we invited candidates to present their experience using a platform called Slide Rocket, which is kind of like a clear slide. It's essentially like much better version of what PowerPoint was then, but web-based, it was like HTML5 or Flash maybe. Trialed it with some eager MBA students from SP Jain, which is a very good reputable university. And that was so successful in terms of us, abandoning the resume, that we didn't implement it actually so it wasn't truly successful. We didn't implement it as a recruiting strategy wholesale. It did get me a lot of stage time at conferences.
So you were being the disruptor in that market and changing the way it works?
Trying to. I mean, the fact is it's quite, I guess, like quite quaint or interesting or a different, nobody likes resumes is something that I learned during, giving those talks. People were like, this is really crazy that we've kind of always done it this way. And this is like, for many people, it's an impediment to success because people do make judgments. I think that my mode of processing and synthesizing that information is no different to any other recruiter in the world, which is like laser focused on job titles, duration, and last 3 years. Total length of experience, maybe. It's increasingly getting that period of time that you're more interested in is shrinking.
How much time will you look at the last 3 years currently, or is it shorter than that now?
I think right now, depending on the total experience of the candidate, typically it would be the last 3 to 5 years that's the important chunk. The other stuff is kind of supporting information, but it's not the critical information.
So we're going to touch on recruitment a little bit more, but you're in a senior talent role now, but at some point you had a first job. And how did you make that leap between there and where you're at now?
I was somebody that was very fortunate growing up that my parents would invest in travel. I got to see parts of the world that I never really dreamed of, and that was kind of we were going to consistently different and interesting places instead of the Costa del Sol or
Tenerife.
Classic.
That's where I was. That's where we would have bumped into each other.
So I mean, that kind of really enriched my ability to imagine things, and I had a hearty appetite for reading as well. I would consume books, storybooks, history books, like anything, fiction or fantasy. It didn't really matter to me. And I was also very interested at one time in that genre of choose your own adventure books as well, which was
my wife and I actually bought some of those off of eBay because we were trying to say to our kids, there used to be this book, and so we were trying to remember what it was called, and we bought some. My kids love them.
Yeah, they're really great, and they're really great for the development of that kind of imagination and curiosity. So I think I almost like I started to kind of question things a lot more than I think as somebody that had perhaps travelled less or had less of a vivid imagination. In particular, I would question systems. Like as a very young kid, I would be always asking why. Like my mum would say to me, and I was like, all kids do that, of course, but I think I would do it to like ridiculously annoying levels. And so I was seeking answers constantly. And when I found that the answers were unsatisfying with respect to the education system, like any system, it can be very bureaucratic. And so, I was very unsatisfied as a kid growing up with some of the kind of answers that that system was delivering. It was also not well aligned with the things I was actually interested in. There were subjects where like there were certain elements of that subject that would be in some interest, but I found it quite hard to focus on I didn't fall in love with anything really except for probably English. And I think that was to a large extent I was very fortunate to have an amazing teacher in that subject as well. And anyone that's had a really amazing teacher in any subject will be able to relate exactly.
When you were at school, was it a good school? Was it a bad school?
I mean,
did you pass your 11 plus?
Didn't take the 11 plus.
Okay.
And I did sit an exam to try and get into Nottingham Boys High School, which was is a very well-to-do, and that would have set me up, I think, brilliantly for a fantastic academic career. But I failed the exam, And, I wasn't too concerned. I think my parents were more concerned. So I ended up in a state school. So, yeah, the school was quite tough. The standard of teachers, I'm sorry, I know it's much improved now.
Just to caveat that, it's a great school now.
Great school now, but, the standard of teaching was not great.
At least they kept your school open. My school got shut down. They gave up. They said there's no saving this place. And then they turned it into a community college, I think.
Okay, I mean, no, it's the funny thing is this particular school. Of course, I go back home and visit my mum, and the school is now doing really well, and it's kind of turned a corner at some point. I guess after I left, things started to get better for them, perhaps. But I think because I was kind of just didn't respect the system, then I became quite distracting and quite problematic, and an impediment to the success of my fellow students. Somebody that was obnoxious and not nice for the teachers to have around. And so I was excluded from the school system. I think at age 15. It was like just before I was due to do A levels.
So did you do your A levels?
Nah.
Okay.
It was like right after my GCSEs.
Yeah.
I think I tried to retook math, and like I got a lower grade than I took it when I took it the first time. So that was quite an accomplishment. I think I started off on a D, and then I managed to achieve like an F or something. So just abominable. That was quite a shock to the system, I think, for my parents. And so I ended up actually leaving home at age 15.
You left home at 15?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I was on state support in regard to housing benefit. I had to actually kind of not like divorce my parents who had done absolutely nothing wrong, like just for the record. Like they were fine, just normal parents.
It's your fault. You take full responsibility.
So yeah, for sure. So I had to kind of, I remember having to sign some paperwork at the local benefits centre saying like I have no further contact with them, because obviously it could have been a game that the parents send the kid to go and claim benefits. And
yeah, wow.
It took me quite a long time to work at all. My first exposure to work was worked in a factory, Carter's Lemonade factory, on some weekends on night shift for like 12-hour shifts.
£2 an hour,
just
or
about
£1.50 an hour.
No, it was $6.50 or something. It was like decent. It was very decent money because it was like working in actual hell. So, it's like just a vision of hell. Like pipes
actual
everywhere.
Hell.
Yeah, it was like a really old building, like pipes everywhere, like steam.
Health and safety was covered though, I'm sure.
Steam, I don't know about that. Like it was really like it felt like I'd earned this by being a bad person in my early years. But we would just do that. Just to make some quick cash, and then just survive just about on the government, what the government was willing to hand out, which was about £35 a week, I think.
And then what age did you get into recruitment?
So I had a number of those odd type jobs. I ended up working in a direct mail company, so direct marketing company. By this time I'd moved south, so I moved to Milton Keynes and changed my accent. Because the Nottingham accent doesn't travel well.
Right, okay.
So luckily I had was gifted enough in mimicking.
Does Milton Keynes have an accent? I'm not sure.
It's just a non-accent. Stevenage, Milton Keynes, Bedfordshire.
It's a home counties thing.
It's like just a home counties thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So having relocated there, working for this direct mail company, I was actually working in the warehouse originally, and I befriended the guys that were wearing the shirts, who were in the kind of minding the print machines, these things like coughing up like junk mail by the millions and millions, destined for everybody's doorstep in the whole country. And from there I kind of transitioned into like a sales role
within that company.
And then I went on to sell for about 6 months or rent trucks and trailers, which was quite an interesting experience. My patch was Scotland. So I actually learned to closely mimic the logistics managers, the warehouse managers' accent on the phone, mirroring them to land the deals, which worked like really, really well.
But did you not just have to carry that through Like if you bumped into one of them in the street now, they would be like, wow, your accent's changed so much.
Well, I think the chances of me running into some of those warehouse managers shifting fish up and down the country, like pretty slim.
They're not around anymore.
And they're not likely to be here in New York. So, but yeah, that worked really well. So it was actually, my foundation was sales. And then post that, actually, there was the person that hired me, the recruiter that hired me for the truck and trailer telesales job, that I identified that, hey, this kid might be good at recruiting. So I went out and bought a suit from Oxfam because I hadn't needed to wear a suit. It was a double-breasted shiny olive suit. It was about 3 sizes too large. And I got a job at Kelly Services. So that was my first.
So Kelly's was your first. They were actually the agency that placed me in my first job, which was I was a fax boy at NatWest Card Services. And I tried to tell my little girl what I did for a job. When I said fax boy, there was the whole concept of what is a fax. So I was like, imagine a person who delivers all your emails by hand, and if he takes a day off, nobody gets their emails.
Yeah,
that was me. But yeah, Kelly Service placed me in that role.
Yeah, I mean, it was terrifying because you're sat in there and basically anybody in the world can come in and you have to deal with whoever walks in. And I think
they're not always placeable.
Yeah, I mean, it was your first experience of like working with something reminiscent of a database, and but they were really good people in there, and I learned a lot about not just about recruiting, but Kelly's kind of operate like almost like a bunch of small businesses. So
and you were what age at that point?
A lot younger. Yeah, I think I was probably like 22 maybe, something like that. Yeah.
So I guess then the lesson to be learned from that is you left school at 15 with...
Well, I exited. Yeah.
Yeah. You were removed from the school at 15.
Yeah.
And then at 21 you start it's a high street brand, but it's your first kind of executive role, but it's a business environment.
Sure. Yeah.
So do you think then, how do you feel when people, because I have children, and one of the things I see already, even at 8 years old, is what do you want to be when you grow up? And to me, when somebody says, what should your 8-year-old be doing? My view is enjoying herself. Like, how could you have any comprehension of what you want to do for the rest of your life when you're 8?
So, I mean, it's the lesson is it doesn't matter if you don't know what you want to do when you're 15 years old or 8 years old.
Or 20 years old.
Or 20 years old. And there's lots of opportunities and options. And just the main thing is to just be curious and don't think that even when you do find a thing that you think is good, that's the be-all and end-all. I do think that there's a lot of over-parenting and almost like over-prepping people for the future, because the world is as scary, and increasingly it's a scarier place. But
and the jobs that my children will do don't exist yet.
Probably.
So there's a foundation skill set, which in my mind is be nice, be curious, work hard, turn up on time.
You're absolutely right. So, I mean, it's like really brilliant basics, like have integrity, meet commitments, try and deliver some value with every interaction, communicate clearly, smile more, talk less. These kinds of things. I was very fortunate that my parents were very supportive of whatever it was that I wanted to do, and they made that really crystal clear to me at like age 5 or 6. Inevitably, it's like racing driver or something, astronaut. And then, but they followed that question up with, we don't really care whether you empty the bins, take out the trash for a living, as long as you're happy. And that, I was like, that was a really memorable event for me.
And when you go to the careers advisor at school, nobody said to me, oh, I think you'd make a really good entrepreneur, or I think you'd be really good at talent acquisition.
Yeah. I mean, don't worry that you don't know what you want to do. You will find your calling. People do. And if you have found a calling that you feel is not going to stand the test of time, then don't be afraid to escape from it and find something else.
So we had a pre-recording chat, and one of the things that surprised me when we were talking was you were talking about the contrast between work Michael and home Michael. And one of the reasons why I thought of you as an immediate guest is because you obviously confident, and you come across as almost an extrovert. And when people talk about you within Group M, it's almost like they have this elevated sense of, oh, Michael will do that. Michael's, he's an extrovert type guy. But then when we spoke, you kind of said that there was some form of a split personality. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah,
Not an actual split personality, just for the record.
I mean, this is a strange one, because I absolutely believe that in order to be happy at work, you need to bring your real self to the office. If you're putting on a mask, or if you're not representing the real you in your words and your actions, then you're going to suffer, because you will not be at ease with that. So I do think that I'm representing myself kind of as I truly am, and people do see me as somebody that's very gregarious and bouncy and loud, and is extroverted. I think 99% of the people that know me here, they know me as being in that kind of personality type. But the truth is, as we discussed, is that I when I'm outside the office, I tend to not shun people. I have a really tiny friends network who are based all over the world. I don't actively seek out new friendships, and haven't done for many years. I spend a lot of time in really introspective hobbies, producing music, which is not like when people think about producing music, they probably think about like glamorous, like P. Diddy or something like that. And
that's what I'm imagining, yeah.
And that's just one example. I like computer strategy games, and so yeah, I think that's not the behavior of an extrovert. And certainly, even though New York City is like the absolute epicenter of all different kinds of exciting activities that require you to go out and expose yourself to other people, I am comfortable in the self that exists at work. But
you use up all that time
all
at work.
Gone, consumed completely. So it's like I'll arrange things to do things with people, and my wife and I will frequently just cancel.
See, I think I've got better at it, where now I just won't even make the plans. So now I know future me is going to say you're going to regret doing this. So I'm just like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah,
which is
it's
bad.
Better.
But being an adult is making plans and then cancelling them. It seems to me.
Yeah, that's part of the that's part of it. Yeah.
But you should almost have your disposable income when you're younger, because when I was younger, I wanted to do everything, but I couldn't afford to do it. And now I can afford to do it, but I don't want to do anything. So the option is, if I could stay at home, that's the best day possible.
Well, I feel you. I hear you totally.
But do you take your work home with you?
So one of the modes of one of the main modes and types of working in Asia Pacific is that you work all the time. So it would
almost for show sometimes. I remember when I was in Japan, and friends would work in offices, and they'd be like, I was in the office till 11. We were really busy. No.
But the great thing about Asia is obviously every market is really, really different, and there's probably none that are more different than Japan. I experienced a lot of actual 12, 14-hour shifts where there was like really hard work happening a lot. Weekends were not sacred at all. You established a way of working which entails working from home a heck of a lot, and taking your work home. You tend to find that if you're an expat and you have brought a partner or family over, they sort of have to reach a point of acceptance. And if your partner is from the region, then it's kind of just considered a norm, really, a cultural norm in majority of markets.
But now, would you sit in the evening and respond to emails, or?
No. So first of all, it's in America, there's the weekends are sacred. That's a cultural norm here, which I quickly discovered. Evenings are also sacred as well. People will generally work the 9 to 5, and it's considered it's kind of a bad leadership example if you're in the office at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock. Even if it's only occasionally, it doesn't reflect well on you as a leader.
Because if people are doing that, then it suggests you've taken on too many projects that you can't handle, which means you're doing nothing well.
Correct. I mean, it's precisely that. And, nobody wants, that's a bad look, right? Whereas in Asia, it's like there is this kind of sense of heroism, I think, and also endurance as well. So it's been really incredible for me to be here in the US, where now I've got like so much more of my life back. Like literally, I have 100% more time outside of work than I had before. And you can do a lot with that, or just play computer strategy games and
make music.
Hi-hats.
But I think I've certainly found as I've got older that I know that the crisis that happened that day actually isn't a crisis. And when you're early in your career, you think everything is going to end the world, but actually you realize that most things sort themselves out. And unless it's absolutely, dire, then you can just switch your emails off and switch them back on in the morning.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I remember one CEO that I talked to in China who I was trying to headhunt for a role that we had open, and I asked him, what's your leadership style? I remember this guy, I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was something like, look, my leadership style is I tell people nobody dies and we're all okay. Like that's basically it. And I just tell people that, and it works brilliantly. And that's it. I was like quite taken aback. I was like, oh, okay. And I think, that's so true, but people put so much stake and heart and effort and energy and emotional energy in their work that sometimes for people, there is that drama around it. And I think the older you get, the more pragmatic you are around that. But, I still know people at my age and older than me that kind of run around like there's a fire. I think you can compartmentalize things, and I've accomplished that before. It's not easy to do. It takes some effort, because you got kind of going against the natural course of things, the natural rhythm of things.
Well, the final thing we're going to cover off is, I think, something that was really interesting when we spoke before, which was one of the things that you see happen in recruitment. So I'd like to try and expand on that and give the framework that you explained to me when we spoke previously.
Sure. So if you are the head of recruitment, or even just a recruiter, the way to make your job infinitely easier is just to focus on headhunting people from your immediate competitors, because they are the people that will inevitably be the most likely to get hired. Now, this sounds like really, okay, well, that's not really an aha thing, but there's a tool that we've been using here called LinkedIn Talent Insight. Obviously, LinkedIn have their own kind of economic graph and employment graph, which is 500 plus million members. So this tool, LinkedIn Talent Insights, allows you to kind of query and visualize very quickly information around migratory patterns of talent. You can cut it by skills, you can cut it by years of experience, all of the functionality that exists in LinkedIn Recruiter and the LinkedIn search engine is kind of suddenly visualized, and it's really interesting. One thing I noticed, the severity was what surprised me. So most companies, they are just generally recruiting from their top 4 competitors, and I think we looked at the Adidas, Nike example,
Under Armour. So and people were just moving around in a pattern.
Yeah, I mean, I call it the velodrome. So if you're familiar with it's like the speed cycling stuff that happens, where you have people that look pretty much exactly the same athletic build and the same, the only thing that's different is the lycra is different colours, and they're just kind of going round and round in this circle.
Is that people moving? Speeds. So that's from company to company, but most people find it easier to make a step up in their career by changing companies. So it's almost, I move and step up. I move and step up, and that goes round and round. Or is it people in the same job role? I'm a product marketing manager for Nike, and now I'm a product marketing manager for Under Armour.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people, especially given that the evaluation of risk is sometimes very swiftly done, especially if there's financial incentives baked in, people are definitely willing to make lateral moves. Are they the top talent though? Probably not. Yes. Honestly. So it's, and yes, you are inevitably, you're going to be worth more to a competitor. I just think that it's really unfortunate that companies are doing this, and almost without exception, companies are doing this.
Does it create almost like a systematic bias as well, though? Because if you're hiring from the same pool, you could end up hiring just white male moving around, and if somebody was in a slightly, let's say, left field brand that they worked for, that was maybe predominantly a female environment at that point, that they then wouldn't be able to infiltrate because of the way that you're hiring.
Absolutely. I mean, it's because these habits are ingrained typically as well at companies. Then it's kind of both. It can be both explicit and implicit, conscious and or unconscious. The fact is, if you are in a company where there's a lack of diversity and you have a stated aim to change that, if you're hiring from the same 4 organizations typically, or organizations very similar, rather than from adjacent industries.
Yes.
And if those organizations lack diversity, how on earth are you going to move the needle? Like, it's just, it's not possible. So I'm quite upset by this, because I've looked very carefully and closely at our competitors, and diversity is not a new topic here in America. It's been talked about for the longest time, but in our industry, then we've not been able to, companies have not really managed to make dramatic changes. The reason for that is because everybody's guilty of poaching from each other, and so that's the reverse of diversity. It's an absolute impediment. It prevents diversity.
So I guess your journey is somewhat different to what most people's journey within the organisation is then, because I notice when in certain organisations, when I'm connected to people, if I look at their education, certainly in the US, I'll see Ivy League schools and in senior jobs as where you got asked to leave school.
Yeah.
So do you find there's any form of snobbery around your route versus other people's routes?
Not in America, honestly. I think America loves the underdog. Obviously, depending on how you tell that story,
of course,
you can definitely be the guy that kind of picked himself up and made something of himself. There is a certain romance to that.
Yes,
for Americans in particular.
So how do you combat, like, you're going into this process now where you've got this technology from LinkedIn, you've had the realization. How do you then alter that course? Is it just a matter of consciously trying to look at companies you wouldn't have considered before?
That's a really great question. So I would say that it starts with awareness. If you hoard the information and then try and solve the problem, then you're never going to get anywhere. The course that we're on is really just making sure that all of our global chief talent officers, not just in the US, all of our CEOs here in the US, everybody understands that this is actually at the root of the problem. It's not that we're not attracting a diverse enough crowd to easily flip the business to reflect the society in which we operate. We don't have a pipeline challenge. We have a lack of imagination around what talent is.
So and I guess if it's like nobody got fired for buying IBM, if nobody gets fired from hiring from Publicis or wherever.
Yeah, and it's truly a great shame because not just because a diverse business is a better business, mm-hmm. but it behooves us as advisors to the world's largest advertisers to have a talent makeup which reflects every single strata and type of person that lives in the society, right? So yeah, it needs to course correct, and in that course correction is about behavior change, and that stuff is hard, and it takes time. But I think having identified the problem is
step one. Well, that was very insightful. I know we're just approaching. We've got 3 minutes left, so I'm going to use that 3 minutes to say thank you.
All right.
Well, I'm going to use about 30 seconds of it to say thank you. So it's been hugely insightful. You've been an amazing guest. Hopefully, I can improve on my interviewing technique. But I feel like we did a pretty good job for episode number 1.
I mean, there's no benchmark yet.
There's no benchmark. Like I said, things can only get better.
This was a 10 compared to the last guy.
Awesome. Michael, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.